So, Heart of Darkness, here we go. Heart of Darkness is probably the toughest book you read in school, fiction-wise at least. And so, if this was a challenge for you, that's just fine, and you are not alone, and that's probably appropriate that it should be challenging. So, a couple things about the book. The question will kind of keep coming back to as one of the more widely taught collegiate books. Um, Very, very famous. It has a bunch of racist stuff in it. And so the kind of question we're going to be coming back to is this a racist book? Which defends the idea of colonialism, right? Where countries go on over and colonize and take over. Or is the book against racism and very much against colonialism? So this will be the kind of question. I think that you could write a very convincing argument on both sides. This book comes up a lot when we are at our CIS workshops, and there was one teacher who would refer to it constantly, right? So, um, beginning of the book starts on a boat, right? And on the boat we have Marlowe, and we have an unnamed narrator who tells us Marlowe's story. Now, this is a little bit confusing, and you only see that unnamed person occasionally. You see them in the beginning, right? And then occasionally Marlowe will be telling his story, and then we'll go back from Marlowe telling the story as they go up the river in Africa to Marlowe telling the story sitting on the boat in Europe, right? And the unnamed narrator will sometimes comment on what Marlowe's doing and looking like as he tells the story, as well as the reaction to the other people on the boat. Now, this what this does is this provides a couple layers of separation between the author and the author's views on these things and what's being written in the book, right? This is not necessarily the author's point of view, but this is Marlowe's point of view as told by somebody else, right? Now, we'll talk about it. I think it might be important the people that he talks to about on the boat, because this is going to address one of the big questions on the book. Marlowe seems very much against colonialism throughout the whole book. He won't go so far as to explicitly state that, but the biggest thing, but he points out lots of terrible things throughout the whole book. Basically, the European people look awful through the whole thing. But the big question is why, when Marlowe returns back to Europe, he doesn't tell anyone about this, right? Now, you could make an argument that telling the lawyer and the director of the company and the accountant, these would be people who might not know this stuff, but might actually be in a position to change things. So, anyway, so a couple things. Go to page 2 and page 3. We have some good quotes about Marlowe in the beginning, which is supposed to make us trust him. It said, Marlowe sat cross-legged aft, leaning against the mizzenmast. He had sunken cheeks, a yellow complexion, a straight back, an aesthetic aspect, and his arms dropped, the palms outward, resembled some idol. I'm going to try to put this on the screen as we go, but I can't do that, so we'll go, that's not going to be useful. You're just going to have to follow along on the page. Now, what this is supposed to do is make us trust Marlowe. We get a couple descriptions of him being compared to the Buddha, right? Now, Buddha was a religious figure. Buddha was not a god. Buddha was just a person. But Buddha was a teacher, right? And so Marlowe is supposed to be somebody that we can trust and whose opinion matters to us. On page 4, we get a little bit of a description and kind of a different setup here between the idea between colonizing and conquering. This is going to be touched on a couple times in these first couple pages. On page 4, it talked about hunters of gold or pursuers of fame. They'd all gone out on that stream, bearing the sword and often the torch, messengers of the might within the land, bearers of the spark from a sacred fire. What greatness had not floated on the ebb of river into the mystery of the unknown earth, the dreams of men, the seed of commonwealth, and the germs of empires. Now, this is anti-colonialist language, right? And this is showing that what they're doing, going out for gold and going out for all that stuff, is what they're really doing is trying to make money, right? And so they have this kind of high-minded language that what they're doing is helping people and saving them, but really what they're doing is trying to exploit them and steal their resources. Now, on page 5, we have a good quote here about Marlowe and a difference between Marlowe and most people. So it said, the yarns of a seaman have a direct simplicity, the whole meaning of which lies within the shell of a cracked nut. So for most sailors, when they tell a story, what you want to get at is what the story is really about and what's going on the inside of the story, right? You try to crack it at and get at what the theme is or what the message is. You're trying to figure out what the meaning of the thing is. But Marlowe was not typical, if his propensity to spin yarns be expected, and to him, the meaning of an episode was not inside like a kernel, but outside, enveloping the tale, which brought it out only as a glow brings out a haze. Now, Marlowe wants to stay on the surface, right? It's not on the inside of the shell, not on the inside of the story, but on the outside, right? Marlowe doesn't want to look too deeply into things, and this is one of his struggles throughout the whole book, because he's a little worried about what he's going to find, right? So oftentimes he refuses to acknowledge what he sees in front of him, such as people from Africa being abused and mistreated. And rather than that, he focuses on other things, like work. He tries to stay on the surface because he doesn't want to look too deeply into the heart of darkness. Get it? That's the title. Yeah. Anyway, going on. Now, go to page 8. This is the differences between colonizers and conquerors. Now, it said on page 8, mind, he began again, lifting one arm from the elbow, the palm of his hand outward, so that, with his legs folded before him, he had the pose of a Buddha preaching in European clothes without the lotus flower. Mind, none of us would feel exactly like this. What saves us is the efficiency, the devotion to efficiency. But these chaps were not much account, really. They were no colonists. Their administration was merely a squeeze, and nothing more, I suspect. They were conquerors. And for that, you want only brute force. They grabbed what they could get for the sake of what could be gotten. The conquest of the earth, which mostly means taking it away from people who have a different complexion or slightly flatter noses than ourselves, is not a pretty thing when you look into it too much. What redeems it is the idea only. Now, a couple things about this. He's basically kind of giving up, this is what colonizing is, right? Going and taking land from people who look different than you, right? And putting them to work. Now, what redeems it is the idea only. Now, what they're doing is terrible, but what the people in Europe think they're doing is colonizing is good. Right? We're going to see from Marlowe's aunt what she thinks that the company is doing, and what the people in Europe think the company is doing is wildly different than what the company is actually doing, right? Now, that idea is what Marlowe's going to want to find out through the whole book. As he goes up the river and things get crazier and crazier and seem less and less like they're supposed to be, and less about what Marlowe expects, then he's going to want to try to not pay attention to those things. Right? And so he wants to talk to Kurtz in the end and find out what it is that he's missing so he can understand this. Right? He doesn't want to look too deeply into it. Now, on page 9, we have another quote that describes Marlowe's stories. I suppose you fellows remember I did once turn freshwater sailor for a bit. This is when he went up the river in Africa. That we have been fated before the ebb began to run to hear one of Marlowe's inconclusive experiences. Now, this is it, right? We have to draw our own conclusions about a lot of what his story means and what he's getting at, because he's not going to come out and tell us. For instance, whether he's pro-colonialism or anti-colonialism. That's going to be up to us to kind of tease that out. Okay, now on page 11 and 12, talks about how Marlowe got his job originally, right? And from the time he was a kid, he was very interested in exploring and trying to find things, right? And it said, so the person who had his job before him on page 12 was a pilot, right? I got my appointment, of course. Actually, I take that back. Go back to the bottom of page 11. There's one other quote first. Marlowe talks to his aunt. Now, one of the papers you can write in this book about this book is the depiction of women in the book, right? There's kind of 3 women who are described. We got the aunt, we have the intended at the end, and then the queen who Kurt seems to be having some type of relationship with. Now, Marlowe, when he starts to get his job, first he said on the bottom of page 11, the men said, my dear fellow, and did nothing. Now, when he goes to try to talk to dudes about what he wants to do, go up the river, they look at him and they're like, oh, buddy, why do you want to do that? And then they don't do anything. Right? So then he goes to the women and he tries his aunt. Now, if you listen to the way the aunt describes what she thinks he's going to be doing, she's got a very particular view of the greatness that he's going to be able to bring about. Then I tried the women. I, Charlie Marlowe, set the women to work to get a job. Heavens. The aunt said, it will be delightful. I'm ready to do anything. Anything for you. It's a glorious idea. Now, glorious is a very religiously tinged word, and we're going to see a lot of words like that to describe what the people in Europe think the company's doing. Now, the dude who had his job before Marlowe did on page 12 said he was killed in a scuffle with natives. They got into a fight about a chicken. It was Fresleven, that was the fellow's name, a Dane, thought himself wrong somehow in the bargain, and he went ashore and started to hammer the chief of the village with a stick. It didn't surprise me. Fresleven was the gentlest, quietest creature that ever walked on 2 legs. No doubt he was, but he'd already been a couple years already out there engaged in the noble cause, and this is again one of those things that you could kind of put air quotes around, because I think he's being sarcastic when he describes it that way. And he probably felt some need of asserting some self-respect in some way. However, through this glorious affair, I got my appointment before I'd fairly begun to hope for it. Now, if these people are really going to help people, right, and to try to improve their lives, and then they end up getting in a fight over chicken where they kill the chief, that shows A, that the people who are in this company are probably not that good people, and what they are doing is not what they are telling people in Europe that is going on there. Because I think the people in Europe would be horrified if they really knew what was going on. Okay, now going on page 14 and 16, we get a little mythological reference to those of you who have taken Greek mythology. When Marlowe goes into the waiting room to get his appointment, it said, I opened the first door I came to. 2 women, one fat and one slim, sat on straw-bottomed chairs knitting with black wool. And then on page 14, we get one more reference to them. It said, as he's leaving, it said, she seemed to know, actually, just before Marlowe goes in, she seemed to know all about them and me too. An eerie feeling came over me. She seemed uncanny and fateful. Often, far away from there, I thought of these 2 guarding the door of darkness, cutting black wool for a warm pall. Now, what that means, the fates in Greek mythology decided when you were going to live and die, right? And they would use this thread, and at the end of your life, they would cut the thread, and that would be the end, right? So Marlowe sees these 2 women who they're just office employees, but Marlowe views them as the fates, right? They can see what's going to happen to Marlowe and where he's going to have to go. Okay, a couple more things. On page 17, so Marlowe talks to the doctor. And on page 17, the doctor starts to ask him some questions about his family history and various things. It said, I always ask leave in the interest of science to measure the crania of those going out there, so the skull. And this is a practice called phrenology, which is a discredited pseudoscientific practice, measuring someone's head size to determine their intelligence. And when they come back to, I ask, I never see them, he remarked. The doctor. And, moreover, the changes take place inside, Ever have any madness in your family? He asked, a matter-of-fact tone. Is this question in the interest of science, too? It would be interesting for science to watch the mental changes of individuals on the spot, but... Now, what the doctor wants is to see what is going to take place with Marlowe when he goes out into the jungle. Now, basically, he's saying the changes take place on the inside. So I'll measure your skull when you leave, but I probably won't see you because you're probably not coming back. And B, it's not that the size of your head is going to change. It's going to be your mind, right? The man enlarged my mind, which is a quote about Mr. Kurtz. And there's also a quote about that hanging up in my classroom. The changes take place on the inside. In Marlowe's attempt to not acknowledge what is going on in front of him, it almost drives him mad. Right, and at the end, he even describes it, and he talked about Kurtz did go off the deep end and become mad, and Marlowe almost did, but he pulled his foot back at the last second. All right, now last couple things, and then that'll be it for today. When he talks to the aunt, we get some more information about what the people in Europe think is going on here, right? And the aunt kind of represents these people, and she clearly has no idea. So it said, first of all, one last thing to do remain, and this is on 18 and 19. Say goodbye to my excellent aunt. It seems quite plain to me that I had been represented to the wife of the high dignitary, and goodness knows how many other people besides, as an exceptional and gifted creature. It appeared, however, I was one of the workers with a capital, something like an emissary of light, something like a lower sort of apostle. There'd been a lot of such rot let loose in the print about that time, and the excellent woman living right on the rush of all that humbug got carried off her feet. I was quite uncomfortable. I ventured to hint that the company was run for profit. So first of all, she's been hearing stories in the news and reading them about all the wonderful things the company's doing to help people in Africa, and she's very excited her nephew's going to do that. Now, it said, it's queer how out of touch with truth women are. They live in a world of their own, and there have never been anything like it and never can be. It is too beautiful altogether, and if it were set up, it would go to pieces by sunset. Now, this idea about roles of women in the book, pay attention to the aunt. This is about the only place she comes up, right? And she and the intended are very similar. They're rather ignorant, right? And they're not very intelligent, and they don't really know what's going on. And the company uses that lack of knowledge to be able to go and do whatever they want in Africa. Lastly, it said, after this, I got embraced and told to wear flannel and to write often. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to the jungle. First of all, wearing flannel in the jungle would be terrible to wear. And plus, it's not like he's going to have anywhere to send letters, right? So this shows that the woman who got him the job has no idea what's going on, and she really represents the people in Europe. So that is all for today. Tomorrow, we'll be looking at the first station questions. So again, as always, if you have any questions, please email or call. Thank you for your attention.